February 26, 1996 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. UFC 9 nearly shut down Tommy Morrison and the blood issue in pro wrestling. WWE's latest in your house pay-per-view, tons more by Observer staff. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 950091228. February 26, 1996. All week long, there was some question whether the 9th Ultimate Fighting pay-per-view would take place in Puerto Rico. In midweek, things were not going UFC's way after a Puerto Rican government-ordered ban of the show combined with one of the major cable systems in the United States deciding not to carry the event. The ruling in Puerto Rico was overturned the day before the show was scheduled after a federal court fight in UFC 8 went on as scheduled at Ramon Rodriguez Arena in Bayamon, near San Juan. However, despite UFC officials scoring their biggest win to date in the day leading up to the show, they also suffered their greatest economic loss. Cablevision Systems Corporation, facing political and religious pressure particularly in their home base in Connecticut, canceled airing of the UFC and all its systems 2 days before the scheduled event, along with its scheduled replay showings. In a statement to consumers, the company said they expect to never air UFC or similar type of events in the future. In response, Semaphore Entertainment Group, the parent company of UFC, of the show in the Long Island daily newspaper Newsday, explaining that the show wouldn't be available on pay-per-view in the area and who to call to voice complaints. Reportedly, the switchboards at the Cablevision main office were flooded with irate callers all day Friday and Saturday. The ban of UFC from the approximately 1.5 million addressable homes covered nationwide by Cablevision, which is strongest in the Northeast and represents 7% of the total pay-per-view potential audience, became a major topic of discussion the next day on The Howard Stern Show. Stern is both a fan of UFC, and Semaphore Entertainment Group bought advertising for this card on his show. His show was also sponsored by Extreme Fighting before its pay-per-view show, and Stern's show basically served as the main venue for getting information out on Extreme Fighting when it was in the midst of controversy in the New York area and had to move its show to North Carolina at the last minute. Stern called the decision by Cablevision Gestapo tactics and said the only problem he could see with the UFC is that it's not on television more often. Stern, whose home is part of Cablevision's coverage, threatened to cancel his cable coverage and buy a satellite dish because he was so mad at the company's decision. Campbell McLaren of Semaphore Entertainment Group, who was the co-executive producer of the event, said that Semaphore Entertainment Group had a signed contract with Cablevision Incorporated which the group didn't inform them they were going to violate until the day before the event. Much of the pressure on Cablevision, which is based in Norwalk, Connecticut and which had averaged an 0.9 buy rate for UFC events in 1995, came due to pressure from Connecticut Attorney General Richard Blumenthal and from an organized United Religious Group's protest of the event in their home base area. Reverend Thomas Stiers of Greenwich, Connecticut led the local protest, collecting more than 300 signatures to a petition and gaining the support of the area's Council of Churches and Synagogues, and used that pressure to get Blumenthal and U.S. Senator Joseph Lieberman of Connecticut to join forces with them. Blumenthal sent letters to every cable system in the state asking them to follow Cablevision's lead and not to air the event. I am quite troubled by the senseless violence that this contest promotes, aggression and cruelty as a form of entertainment with promises of bloody matches, Blumenthal wrote in his letters to the cable companies. Blumenthal followed it up with a press conference the day before the event where he called UFC inherently despicable programming and claimed it encouraged violent behavior in our society. TCI, the largest and most powerful cable conglomerate in the United States, was quoted in trade journal Multi-Channel News as not expecting his company to follow the lead. It's fairly controversial programming, and we're going to continue to look at it, but we don't think there's any cause to censor it in the company, said Rick Bilkey, the company's pay-per-view manager. Cox Cable in Hartford, Connecticut also decided against pressure from the Attorney General, saying that responsible viewers will make the decision as to what they want to watch. The Connecticut Civil Liberties Union publicly criticized the opponents of UFC, claiming their attempts to get the event not shown constituted coercive censorship. The cable companies should tell Blumenthal to get lost. He's not no right to tell the public what they can and cannot watch, said CCLU Director Joe Grabars. Grabars was not against the religious protests of the event but differentiated that and Blumenthal's actions, claiming cable companies may feel undue pressure from Blumenthal because they are government's licensed public utilities and may be afraid to hanger a high-ranking government authority figure. Intermedia Partners, a smaller cable system, had also decided in January, based on pressure from political opponents of the show, not to carry future UFC or EFC pay-per-view events. Despite major concern until the court fight on the day before the event as to whether or not the show would take place in its scheduled site, it drew a rabid and borderline out-of-control crowd of 5,500 fans, easily the wildest crowd to attend a UFC event to date. Although the overall caliber of competitors was not at the level of the previous shows, it was from the response here, the most entertaining UFC to date, gaining an almost unheard of 100% thumbs up in the poll. Several matches went back and forth, and without an overpowering wrestler like Dan Severn involved, striking, in particular punching and elbows, were able to be used effectively as brutal finishers. The size and strength differences actually in most cases worked in favor of making matches both more competitive and more entertaining. However, because of all the political and religious group pressure somewhat caused by a negative piece on ABC's 2021 week before the show, Semaphore Entertainment Group was noticeably leery about its own product. The announcers, in particular former kickboxing legend Don Wilson, continually made references to UFC being both safer and more entertaining than boxing or kickboxing, saying it's much better if there are injuries to not have injuries to the brain that the latter two sports are known for, and which UFC provides a much smaller risk of, and pointed out that the nature of UFC, because of the smaller serious injury rate as compared with boxing and kickboxing, provides for the opportunity for the fighters to have longer careers. The show had two legitimate knockouts, one from punches, another from elbows. Even though Jeff Blatnick pointed out that the first knockout was exactly the same as any boxing knockout, the cameras were focused on crowd shots rather than the fallen competitor being helped up by the medical crew. Later, after an even more brutal finish which led to a second knockout finish, not only did the cameras again go to crowd shots rather than show the fallen competitor being worked on, but the finish was so brutal they didn't even show a replay. In both cases, the fallen competitors were able to get up and leave the ring under their own power. At press time, we were unable to get information in regard to what injuries, if any, were suffered during the show, but it was said on the broadcast that Paul Varland suffered a broken bone in his foot during his winning effort in the first round and was unable to advance in the tournament. In the wake of boxer Tommy Morrison testing positive for HIV, there may be significant repercussions felt both within American pro wrestling and UFC. While the odds that Morrison contracted the disease from a bloody boxing match or transmitted the disease in one are no doubt rather small, it caused the expected media and public panic on the subject. Commissions around the country are racing as to which can implement mandatory HIV testing to boxers the fastest. Since pro wrestlers also bleed, some states could potentially include them in testing, although commissions, many of which receive much of their funding from taxing pro wrestling events, generally steer clear of any true regulating of pro wrestling except in states and provinces where corrupt commissions appear to attempt to throw the regulatory book at new groups in order to protect existing groups. It is more likely that if the subject of blood in wrestling is brought up, that states could ban blading, which is illegal in some states including Pennsylvania, where it has been routinely used, which many feel has outlived its usefulness. As recent events have shown, however, if done after a long absence, as it has been in recent months in WCW and arguably once in WWF, it seems to increase interest. ECW, a company which in many ways was built on the blade, was the first company to react as Booker Paul Heyman made it clear that blading will no longer exist in his promotion and presented a blood-free show on February 17 at the ECW Arena in Philadelphia. Heyman said that he felt if ECW continued the practice in the wake of the Morrison publicity, the dangers both of being shut down by commissions, particularly in New York and Connecticut, and having it then spread to Pennsylvania, and even more so, problems with getting insurance, would be far more of a threat to kill the promotion than if a few customers who came specifically for the blood decide to search elsewhere for their entertainment. While the company's main cult following was due to being both bloody and violent, using the term hardcore as a description, as compared to WWF and WCW, he felt that now he can compete by providing superior storylines and introducing untapped talent, as he's done over the past year. Both WWF and WCW, as their profit/loss balance waned, switched to more violent styles, with WCW bringing blood back to the forefront since Starrcade in late December. WWF has an official ban of the blade, however, they promoted blood heavily in order to garner a rating for Monday Night Raw with the tape of the Bret Hart vs. Davey Boy Smith match, which drew the best Raw rating of the season. UFC, which, like boxing, because it's a contact sport with blows to the head and eye area, is inherently going to have bloody matches. On ESPN Sports Reporter's television show on February 18, Philadelphia sportswriter Bill Conlon talked about the UFC event 2 days earlier where Sam Adkins, a former sparring partner of Morrison, bled heavily from punches to the face in his match with Don Frye, and questioned what the odds of HIV transmission would be in a UFC which he called a blood sport. John Patton in the Miami Herald tied the Morrison story into wrestling, quoting an unnamed major company wrestler as saying, "Tommy Morrison's out-of-the-ring lifestyle consisted of a lot of women and unprotected sex. That happens a lot in wrestling. Television creates superstars, and when you travel a good bit, different women throw themselves at you and the temptations are there. And then you go get in the ring the next night with someone in the same situation and open to the same temptations you are, with the possibility of either planned or unplanned bloodshed. Morrison wasn't a drug user, while drug use is pretty commonplace in his profession, citing the drug tests and being beatable, and talked to the said Heat wrestlers recklessly sharing needles. Neither WWF or WCW test for HIV, although WWF hinted in the article that it may have to adopt a policy. This is a sport like boxing where bloodshed is an everyday occurrence, said Jay Andronacco of the WWF's Media Relations Department. Guys get hit and bumped all the time. With the whole Tommy Morrison thing happening this week, testing is probably something we ought to look into. I've had a lot of thoughts over the years on the subject of blading and blood in pro wrestling since terms like HIV and AIDS became a part of almost daily life, about 2 weeks ago, according to Floyd Patterson. On the surface, the act of cutting one's forehead with a razor blade to get heat comes off as totally barbaric to anyone at first thought. The idea that there are people who get off on it, on the surface, would repulse most people in American society to no end. However, in a lot of subjects I've had to learn to ignore the base emotional reaction and try to look at things logically. There are so many things done within the confines of pro wrestling matches that are infinitely more dangerous when it comes to injury risk and death risk than blading. I'd suggest the odds of someone being paralyzed by an errant tope or a screwed up rocker dropper are much higher than the odds of being injured seriously from an errant blade job. Between sharing needles and unprotected sex with a wide variety of partners, I hardly think blading is anywhere near the top of the list of legitimate risk among pro wrestlers of spreading HIV, or in a bloody match even the virus spreading to ringsiders. Over the past several years, I've been contacted and had letters written here, many of which have been printed, from doctors, including one well-respected epidemiologist, warning about the risks of double juice matches. In that time, we've seen a basketball superstar contract HIV, a diving superstar contract HIV, many famous actors die from AIDS, an ex-NFL star or two die from AIDS, several famous male figure skaters die from AIDS, and perhaps even one wrestler rumored to have died from AIDS several years ago. Yet, with the possible exception of an incident in a soccer game years ago that many are skeptical of, there is no record of any HIV virus being spread during a contact sports event, be it in a boxing or pro wrestling bloodbath or a football game or whatever. This is not a defense of blading. If it were up to me, I wish the blades would be put away for good, but that has nothing to do with HIV transmission or threat of such. It simply doesn't leave me with a good feeling about the business, but that's hardly the only thing in wrestling that I can say that about. I can't come up with a strong enough argument to justify that my personal feelings should be the feelings of others and that blading should be abolished, just I don't personally like it. If there was a legit threat of such that could be shown tangibly with proof of a legitimately dangerous risk as opposed to rhetoric of what could happen, and we've all seen how dangerous that argument can be and is, I'd be 100% against it as an unnecessary risk. Don't throw the steroid argument at me as if that is the opposite viewpoint of my views on that subject. I've seen too many cases of liver cancer, brain tumors, which are not medically linked to steroids, but I've personally seen a strange amount of them among users, and heart attacks among very young men who abused steroids during their lifetime both in pro wrestling and in the local gym scene, not to mention other injuries that medical experts have directly linked to steroid use in specific individuals known to have abused them. There is too much that has happened for me to not believe that practice is a legitimate health risk, even though I believe many in the medical profession have exaggerated the risk there as well. Blading does work for business when it's not overdone, and even when it is to a small niche group of the wrestling audience, and based on little or no evidence of injuries and or infections from the practice, even with shared blades, which in this day and age has to qualify as just plain stupid, it is far less risky than other practices done within a pro wrestling ring that are done in order to draw money. Right now, the major promotions in the world, both All Japan and WWF, have an outright ban on the blade. WCW had banned it for a long time but brought it back, and the blood appears to have in some ways contributed to a greater interest level in the product. New Japan uses it but doesn't overdo it, and New Japan is the only promotion that has standardized HIV testing for its wrestlers. AAA and EMLL both use the blade liberally, and even though I can remember running from my chair as heavy metal's blood was spurting in my direction, figuring the number of potential lifestyle risks he's taken, I'd bet that for pure human risks both in and out of the ring, the blading hardly ranks high among the lifestyles and ring styles of young wrestling superstars in Mexico. Heyman's addressing the subject in this manner is probably a lot less due to legitimate health risks than legitimate business threats. As we've seen with UFC, emotional issues gain momentum regardless of whether they can be logically backed up with evidence, and this issue is as prime an issue as faces wrestling in UFC then can snowball to ridiculous proportions. The idea of men cutting their foreheads and sharing blood in this day and age is an emotional firecracker that could explode at any moment right now. I agree that for those reasons, as opposed to legitimate risk reasons, it is probably a good time for pro wrestling, at least all the major offices, to ban usage of the blade and to HIV test all wrestlers. I also think for similar reasons, UFC needs to HIV test its fighters because there is inherently going to be some blood spilled at any UFC event, and even if the infection risk is minimal or non-existent, UFC has already faced problems due to emotional reactions, and having bloody matches and not testing is inviting another emotional reaction that they don't need right now. The WWF's latest In Your House pay-per-view show on February 18th from the Louisville Gardens was basically a show designed more to build to WrestleMania than stand alone on its own. While the show was generally well received, I was in the minority on this one. Shawn Michaels and Owen Hart had an excellent match, but from a wrestling standpoint it was a one-match show. Bret Hart and Diesel's main event cage match was terrible, up until the creative ending where Undertaker came from underneath the ring to pull Diesel under the ring and allow Hart to escape from the cage. As expected, Hart once again came out of the match devalued as a champion going into the biggest show of the year. The show was largely designed to set up Michaels' expected title win over Hart, by giving Michaels a strong clean win over an established star, the Diesel vs. Undertaker match and the Vader vs. Yokozuna match. All three were well accomplished, but in doing so, two of the top three matches on the show itself suffered. The show drew a legitimate sellout of 5,500 fans to the Gardens, and the show did sell out a few days in advance, although not the weeks in advance sellout as was proclaimed during the event. Jake Roberts, Aurelian Smith Jr., pinned Tatanka, Chris Chavis, with a DDT in 5:36. Roberts got the big pop coming out, but even his loose ring top couldn't hide that he was terribly out of shape. He blew up fast, and judging from comments here, a large percentage of fans noticed. Dud. Vader and Jim Cornette then did an interview with Cornette basically saying that Vader would get involved on the show. Actually, it was stronger than that. They teased that Vader would be added to the card at the last minute. This aired during the pregame show, in a match as a sleazy last-second attempt to get buys, similar to what WCW did last year in making a last-second tease that a Hogan-Vader match would be added to a pay-per-view show that neither was booked nor wrestled on. For all the legitimate complaints Vince McMahon makes about WCW, when it comes down to the core of things, he's guilty of a lot of them himself. 1. Razor Ramon Scott Hall pinned 1-2-3 Kid Sean Waltman in a baby bottle match in 12:01. Kid came out with a stroller and a Ramon teddy bear. Kid looked smaller than usual, like in the 180-pound range. Even with the size difference, they had a good match. Ted DiBiase threw baby powder in Ramon's eyes to give Kid an advantage. Kid used a lengthy sleeper which neither Ramon nor the announcers had a clue how to effectively sell, and went over the head of most of the crowd as well. Finally, Ramon broke the hold by crotching Kid on the ropes. They went to several near falls before DiBiase distracted the ref and threw the baby powder bottle to Kid. Kid poured the powder in his hands, but when Ramon turned around, he kicked Kid in the hands and the powder went into Kid's eyes. Ramon used one razor's edge and refused to pin Kid, but then did so after a second one. Ramon then put the baby bottle in Kid's mouth, threw powder in DiBiase's eyes, put a diaper on Kid and poured baby powder all over him. When Kid revived in the ring, he started crying. 3 stars. 2. Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Paul Levesque, pinned Duke Droese, Mike Droese, in 9:38. Droese has lost even more weight than Kid. Helmsley came out with another model type. It's hard to tell with his outfit, but Droese could have lost 30 or 40 pounds in the last month, and it wasn't as if he looked cut. He just looked like a much smaller, short-haired brother of himself. He showed good fire, but in spots almost came off geeky, showing the fire by posing with his new body that is an opposing body, but isn't a very good wrestler. Helmsley is improving, and the match was significantly better than their Rumble match. After a power slam, Droese used his new finishing maneuver called the trash compactor, which is a spinning power slam. He then left the ring to get the garbage can. He threw the lid into the ring, and accidentally hit Helmsley in the mouth and appeared to have split his lip open, and then tried to bring the can in. As the ref tried to stop him, Helmsley got the lid and hit Droese with it for the pin. 1.5 star. 3. Yokozuna, Rodney Anoya, beat Davey Boy Smith via DQ in 5:05 when Jim Cornette hit Yokozuna with his tennis racket 3 times. Smith did about as good as one could do given Yoko has no conditioning and can't do a singles match. Now as a face, Yokozuna spoke for the first time, and Mr. Fuji seems to have disappeared. I guess so somebody else can win his award. Yokozuna didn't sell any of the racket shots and stalked Cornette, until Vader came running in. Vader and Smith did a double team on Yokozuna, with Vader finally pulling out handcuffs and cuffing Yoko to the corner. The two continued to beat on Yokozuna, who made several comebacks before being beaten down, until finally all the agents, including for the first time on a pay-per-view, the former George Steele, and the noted Clarence Mason ran in to break things up. 1 star. 4. Shawn Michaels, Michael Hickenbottom, pinned Owen Hart in 1557. Michaels danced on the roof of the house set and used a rope, and came down for his ring entrance. The two had the expected excellent match, although nowhere close to the Bret Hart vs. Davey Boy Smith match in December. Michaels in the early moments did a twisting plancha off the top rope to the floor on Hart. After Michaels suplexed Hart on the floor, he came off the apron and Hart turned the crossbody into a power slam on the floor. They continued doing well-timed excellent spots. Hart used a sharpshooter, but Michaels made it to the ropes. Hart blew his nose on Michaels. Finally, Hart hit the enziguri, which was the key storyline point, knocking Michaels to the floor. Hart brought Michaels back in, but Michaels kicked out of the pin attempt. Finish saw Michaels go for the super kick, but miss. Then Hart went for the enziguri and missed, and finally Michaels connected on the super kick for the pin. 4 stars. 5. Bret Hart beat Diesel, Kevin Nash, in a cage match to retain the WWF title in 1913. From reports live, it appeared Diesel received about 70% of the cheers, although some attributed it to the USWA television show that aired this weekend in Louisville, where Hart was on doing several heel interviews for his match in Memphis with Jerry Lawler. I don't think the portrayal of Hart as a guy who is lucky to be champion and doesn't really deserve it in this day and age helps. With the exception of the Smith match in December, which was the perfect match to get over the champion, since he wins clean, challenger, since he looks so great, better than you'd expect while losing, and belt, since the obvious king of the promotion holds it. However, from a storyline standpoint, Hart lucked into the belt in a match Diesel should have won but was too nice a guy, and then Undertaker should have beaten him twice, but Diesel saved his ass both times, which is the last thing fans want to see happen involving a babyface champion against a popular challenger, because the natural reaction to begin with is to want to see the title change. Anyway, the first 15 minutes of the match were boring, as Diesel was just so limited in what he can do in a match where the object is to climb and he's not climbing. Even forgetting the confines of the match, Diesel looked slow and unimpressive, and Hart lacked fire. It picked up in the last few minutes and had a great finish. As Diesel was about to go out the door to win, Undertaker came from under the ring and grabbed his foot and dragged him under the ring, and special effects of smoke under the ring went through the ring. Hart then escaped the cage to win, but come out of the show once again as a second-tier star underneath Undertaker, Diesel, Michaels, and Vader. Diesel then climbed back from under the ring, with his pants torn, and climbed the cage, running away from Undertaker to show he was afraid of him. Ironically, after largely being cheered during the match, Diesel was almost 100% booed afterwards. 1 1/2 star. Ahmed Johnson, Tony Norris, pinned Isaac Yankem, Glenn Jacobs, with the Pearl River Plunge Tiger Driver, in a pretty bad match. Yankem subbed for Jeff Jarrett, whose back locked up on him in a match the previous day in Memphis, although he was out of the hospital by the next day. The Godwins, Mark Canterbury and Dennis Knight, beat the Bodydonnas, Chris Candido and Tom Pritchard, in what was reported as a good match. Undertaker Mark Calloway beat Goldust, Dustin Runnels, via a walkout countout, so Runnels kept the IC title. This match was also pretty bad. With the exception of possibly Michaels, it appeared the most over performer on the show was Roddy Piper. Piper did an interview segment as they were setting up the cage for the main event, where he seemed to have a clue as to what was going on, and it wound up with Cornette and Mason coming out and Piper pinching Cornette in the butt. However, when hyping WrestleMania's Yokozuna vs. Vader match, Piper said, "Let the blood flow," which must have made McMahon cringe considering the letter he wrote to Ted Turner. I expected McMahon to apologize for the remark, but he let it stand. After the show, Piper did a second interview, this time backstage, announcing the Undertaker vs. Diesel match. After the pay-per-view ended, but in a segment tape that will probably air on the syndicated shows, Jake Roberts did an interview talking about the years where he was addicted to alcohol and cocaine, and said that he was back in wrestling to glorify the Lord. He also said his snake is no longer named Damien, but is now named Revelation. Ken Shamrock made Chemo submit in 4:24 to a knee bar in the super fight, while former Arizona State and Oklahoma State University wrestler Don Fry, a protege of Dan Severn, captured the David vs. Goliath tournament to highlight the February 16 UFC from Bayamon, Puerto Rico. Since the show was so universally well received, I'd like to start off with a few negative comments regarding UFC. As has been mentioned many times in interviews with competitors in martial arts magazines, and even mentioned in UFC's own press kit in an interview with Dan Severn, there needs to be drug testing. It's not a cure-all, but it's a small step that at this point needs to be taken. There needs to be HIV testing, perhaps more, to not allow the sports critics any unneeded ammunition, and if there is a legit threat of the disease spreading, then definitely. If this is sport, which it is, rather than a legalized street fight, drugs that have a competitive advantage, and I'm not only referring to steroids but certainly including steroids, bastardize the competitive aspects of the sport. The other change has to do with time limits. Obviously, time limits in a pay-per-view event are a necessity, and we've all seen why in the past. However, on this show, the latest shortening of the time limits could have been a negative, although on this show it turned out to be a positive. Time limits for the first round and the semifinals were shortened to 10 minutes, with both the tournament championship and superfight time limit shortened from 30 minutes down to 21 minutes, of which would be a regulation 15 minutes and 2 3-minute overtimes. It had little effect on this event as only one match went the time limit, and quite frankly, it was better off considering the way that match was going that the time limit was 10 minutes. Time limits have to balance three aspects: the buying and viewing publics wanting to see a legitimate winner, not boring the public with lengthy matches that don't make for exciting television, and the time constraints of doing a show. After 9 pay-per-view events, a few things come to mind. The most exciting match in the history of UFC was the Oleg Toktarov vs. Tank Abbott match, which went a little over 18 minutes the way they do time now. It was 17:47 then, but now they keep the clock running during the restarts. By the current rules, that match probably would have gone the time limit because Abbott would have gotten a momentary breather at the 15 minutes and 18-minute mark, which may have been enough for him to last the distance, and by today's standards would have resulted in a draw, and Abbott would have won the decision, and the fight would have been neither as exciting nor memorable had that occurred. The Hoist Gracie vs. Dan Severn match, with Gracie's thrilling and memorable victory, may have also ended in the same manner under the shorter time limit and judges' decision rules, as the finish came after the 15-minute mark. At the same time, none of the 30 to 36-minute matches in UFC history, Severn vs. Toktarov, Toktarov vs. Shamrock, and Shamrock vs. Gracie, would have been hurt one iota had they been cut back on time. None of the three were great spectator matches, although the crowd live enjoyed Severn Toktarov a lot more than the live crowd enjoyed the other two, partially because it contained more action, and also because the audience itself is getting smarter. My feeling is the track record shows you need at least 18:30 without a break for the main event. I'd suggest a time limit in the 24 to 25-minute range. It's more than enough time that viewers aren't cheated enough of a finish with guys who actually would go to a finish, and any longer works against the match, so I'd suggest a 20-minute time limit with either a 4-minute or 5-minute overtime for the superfight and championship matches. For the prelims, I'd lengthen the time limit from 10 minutes to 15 minutes, if only because when you have a sport with major size differentials, one of the advantages the smaller men have often is conditioning, which plays more of a part as the time goes on. In many people's eyes, the most exciting fight on this show was Scott Ferozzo vs. Jerry Bolander, which ended with less than 1 minute left in the time limit with the smaller man winning. That fight would have been far less exciting and memorable if they had gone the time limit, and they nearly did, and was evidence that 10 minutes is too short. Having said all that, the show itself was excellent. Most of the newcomers appeared to be skilled enough, with the exception of Thomas Ramirez. Shamrock Chemo was the most exciting of the superfights to date, and also saw Shamrock actually on his back taking punishment for the first time in his UFC career, before showing his submission skill in the finish. 1. Don Frye, who boxed professionally in Mexico and wrestled collegiately while he was at Arizona State. One of the coaches was Severn, and he was one of Severn's training partners for the Ultimate in December. Billed at 206 pounds, he looked about 195. Knocked out Thomas Ramirez of Bayamon, Puerto Rico in 10 with a punch to the side of the jaw. Ramirez was billed at 410 pounds and looked every bit of it, but he was 41 years old and terribly out of shape. He was the hometown favorite and appeared to have been a ticket seller, but he was the one competitor who looked to have no business being in there. 2. Paul Varlan's 6'8", 325-ish, won a unanimous judges' decision in what would have to be classified as a major upset over Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner Joe Herrera, a Gracie student originally from Brazil, who was managed by Alan Goaz, who had a now legendary pancrase match last year with Frank Shamrock going to a draw but having his ankle broken in the process, after 10-12 of a 10-minute time limit. Herrera was billed as 5'11", 205 but looked to be about 5'9", 200, and was dwarfed. Based on rep and experience, he was considered as the pre-show favorite. The match was terrible in that Herrera appeared to be intimidated with Varlan's size and mainly danced away, occasionally locking up and throwing a punch while breaking the lockup and dancing some more. Varlan's didn't want to go to the mat with a submission expert, and Herrera didn't want to try and take down a mountain, which resulted in a dancing stalemate. Varlins was moving forward, so he was the aggressor, and got in a flurry toward the end, which probably spelled the difference in the decision. However, Varlins couldn't continue in the tournament, reportedly due to a broken bone in the foot suffered perhaps when Herrera stomped on his foot. Herrera was unimpressive, and at this point the show did not look promising. 3. Jerry Bolander, a student of Ken Shamrock from Lockford, California, billed at 5'11", 200, but looking to be more like 185 to 190, overcame a huge size and power disadvantage in winning with a choke over 5'10", 330-pound Scott Ferrozzo of Las Vegas in 9:05. Ferrozzo used his size to outpower Bolander, who never panicked even when Ferrozzo was on top of him with all his weight and throwing headbutts. Ferrozzo bled early, and at one point they stopped the match to check his cuts, but the doctors ruled they were superficial. Eventually Bolander used Ferrozzo's own ring outfit, twisting the straps around his neck to start choking him down, and eventually won with a choke. This was an exciting back-and-forth match. 4. Gary Goodridge, a 6'3", 258-pound arm wrestler, strongman, amateur boxer and Kook Sulwan practitioner from Barrie, Ontario, destroyed Paul Herrera, a 5'9", 185-pound former college wrestler at the University of Nebraska, who was seconded by Tank Abbott in 13. Herrera went in for the takedown, but the larger Goodridge managed to stretch him, leaving his head wide open for a barrage of 8 devastating elbow strikes to the jaw and cheekbone. Herrera was knocked out by the first blow, and Goodridge managed to get many more in before John McCarthy could jump in and stop it. One of the most brutal finishing sequences in UFC history. 5. With Varlins out, Fry's second-round opponent was 30-year-old retired pro boxer Sam Adkins, much larger at 6'3", 270, from Houston, a former sparring partner of Tommy Morrison. Fry, also 30, who had boxed pro, acted as if he was going to try boxing, but feinted him out and went for a single-leg takedown and landed on top of him and threw punch after punch on Adkins, splitting his head open before the match was stopped at 47. 6. Goodridge beat Bolander in 5:34. Goodridge got Bolander in a front facelock immediately, but Bolander managed to escape. The two went back and forth, with Goodridge using his pure power while Bolander used his skill from amateur wrestling and technique from Lion's Den training. As Bolander was going for the ankle, Goodridge held onto the cage to keep from being taken down and threw a punch straight down and knocked Bolander silly, and McCarthy quickly jumped in to stop the match. 7. Shamrock beat Chemo in 4:24. Shamrock immediately landed a quick punch and took Chemo down. Shamrock worked positioning from the top and finally got Chemo to turn over, exposing his throat. As he went for a choke, Chemo managed to reverse the position on Shamrock and wound up on top. Chemo threw a few headbutts and got a nice punch in, which opened a mouse under Shamrock's eye. As he went for a second punch, he hit nothing but mat, allowing Shamrock to hook his ankle. Chemo kept getting out, but Shamrock kept going back until finally he got the knee bar in and Chemo submitted. 8. Fry beat Goodridge in 2:15 to capture the tournament. This was a back-and-forth match as well. Fry had the better boxing skill, however Goodridge, even though he had less wrestling background, managed to take Fry down twice with pure power. Fry escaped with a backdoor move and wound up on top of Goodridge, and began throwing the punches until Goodridge tapped out. Goodridge, because of his memorable knockout in the first round and exciting fights in the second and third round, combined with a great personable post-match interview, probably came out of the show stronger as a drawing card than even Fry. Goodridge said his weakness was conditioning, although Fry's skill both standing and wrestling appeared from the first moment to be too much for him. During the show they announced the next pay-per-view from Cobo Arena in Detroit on May 17. No matches are official, but it was made clear that they want to put a Shamrock vs. Severn main event. Severn did the color during the super fight and after the show, which ended early. In a wrap-up, the idea of that being the next main event was talked about in detail. The show will consist of 6 singles matches, with 3 of them most likely being Tank Abbott vs. David Beneteau, Oleg Toktarov vs. Marco Waz, and Koji Kiao vs. Mark Hall, who beat Harold Howard in an upset in Buffalo before losing to Varlins, in an Ultimate David vs. Goliath, since Hall is probably 185 pounds. They also plugged the Pancrase pay-per-view on April 13 and twice showed Masakatsu Funaki in the audience and explained who he was. They really didn't do a good job of explaining what Pancrase was other than calling it the hottest martial arts event in Japan, and Don Wilson, who attended the last Pancrase card, said it was similar to the UFC when it comes to rules. It came off to most as similar to the plugs WCW did when promoting the AAA pay-per-view in 1994. After the Shamrock Chemo match there was a major fight in the aisle. We heard differing reports on exactly what happened, but at one point after a promo piece, They came back and you could see mayhem, including a fan throwing a chair and hitting what appeared to be a security person. It was acknowledged there was a fight in the stands, and Wilson said it was similar to any sports event where there are fights in the stands, while Bruce Beck, who gets better with each show and has turned into an excellent commentator for this event, although I guess in comparison with most wrestling commentators anyone would look good, and Jeff Blatnick said there was no place for action like that. Apparently this started in the aisle with a brawl involving who else but Abbott. Reports varied that either Abbott went after a member of the Shamrock Lions Den team as they were leaving after the super fight, or Abbott went after Alan Goez, a well-respected jiu-jitsu practitioner. Referee John McCarthy and former UFC competitor Jerry Harris, who handles security now at UFC events, broke the fight up. After a false start in December, Titan Sports once again unleashed the Ultimate Warrior's return with a promo piece on the February 19th Monday Night Raw television show. Jim Hellwig and Vince McMahon were negotiating in December, but it fell through reportedly due to money disagreements, as well as Hellwig reportedly wanting to use a testosterone patch, which, while legal, would render the basics of the Titan steroid policy as practically worthless. Hellwig follows in a long trail of 80s stars being brought back in recent weeks: Roddy Piper, Road Warriors, Elizabeth, Jake Roberts. The return, and it should be mentioned that it was never directly said that he was returning, also would be ironic and hypocritical, coming on the heels of Titan pointing the finger on television at WCW on the subject of steroids and threatening to expose them more in the future on that subject. The whole proof of a legitimate anti-steroid stance, which neither company has or probably ever will have, would be to avoid using chemical freaks that can make them money because they are sincere in their stance, rather than finding ways to allow the guys who draw the money based on nothing but physiques built by chemicals to be pushed. Because of that, nobody without a full sincere stance promoting pro wrestling has the right to point their finger at another promotion and yell steroids, as Vince McMahon did a few weeks back on television. Because he has a strong testing policy and WCW was so flagrant just a few months back. Now that the heat's on, WCW has probably cleaned up. Some, including myself, were almost able to justify McMahon's actions, and they were a positive for the business because the end result was WCW may have somewhat cleaned up. Whether temporarily or permanently, only time will tell. Besides, taking Hellwig at this point with his track record regardless of steroids appears to be yet another sign of desperation. Brian Pillman showed up on February 17th at the ECW arena in part of his quest to convince people he's completely lost his mind. Pillman was in character from the time he showed up in Philadelphia, showing up at the building wearing a la parka mask to hide he was there and pretending to be only able to speak Japanese backstage. He did an angle in the ring where they turned the house lights off, and when they came on, Pillman was in the ring and received an enormous babyface pop, which continued when he called the current WCW head Eric Jerkoff. Pillman then called the audience smart marks in a derogatory and did an obscenity-laced interview that got most, but not all, of the audience to turn against him, and most to after the fact say it was a fantastic angle. Finally he said he was going to pull out his Johnson and piss all over the fans in the front row. At this point, after a nice lengthy pause, Paul Heyman, Todd Gordon and Shane Douglas, who was part of the decision-making team which is well known to everyone, came out with Heyman saying to Pillman that wasn't part of the deal, and Pillman doing his Booker Man line to Heyman. Eventually Pillman did a worked attack on a fan, pulling out a fork, and ended up being hauled out of the building by the local security force, while Douglas, looking for a piece of him, never laid a hand on him. Pillman was then in character for the rest of the night at the hotel, swearing at fans. Pillman was officially, or at least very publicly, fired by WCW on Thursday, although there are claims he's still on the payroll, as there are indications the company is going to great, and even laughable lengths to try and get everyone to believe it's a shoot. The big danger in this is that wrestlers by nature never trust management to tell them the truth, usually for good reason, but often it becomes a case of extended and out-of-control paranoia. This is only going to confirm and justify in the minds of those who don't trust anything, that they should trust even less, and will eventually make nobody believe anything management tells them, and thus create a worse working environment. As the stories go, and this was on the WCW hotline, Pillman is going to hire the same lawyer who represented Pete Rose to get him back into WCW. Currently he's only confirmed for 2 more ECW dates, on the weekend of March 7th and March 8th, probably to work against Douglas. The Pillman story was the subject of more wrestling conversation in the past week than any wrestling angle in recent memory. There was more of a reaction on both the hotline and internet than to the Shawn Michaels angle or the Lex Luger and Medusa jumps, largely because of people not being sure whether it was a shoot or a work. I'm just not sure how that translates into making money in wrestling other than from Monday through Wednesday of last week on hotlines. Preliminary indications are that the WCW Super Brawl pay-per-view show on February 11th did about an 0.63 buy rate. WCW officials are pegging the figure at 0.70, which is conceivably accurate. The number would be slightly higher than Halloween Havoc and be a huge increase over both World War III and Starrcade. The .63 figure would figure out to approximately 148,000 buys and a $1.86 million company gross. With Pillman and Sherry both out of the picture and Loch Ness turning into the biggest joke in wrestling, the WCW Uncensored card for March 24th in Tupelo, Mississippi has undergone several changes. In the main event, now billed as a Doomsday match with Hulk Hogan against 4 men in 4 different cages, Lex Luger replaces the Loch Ness Monster, joining with Arnold Anderson, Kevin Sullivan and Ric Flair to all face Hogan. Taking Luger's place as Sting's tag team partner against the Road Warriors is supposed to be Booker T of Harlem Heat, although that may not take place since T is booked at this point on that date for New Japan Pro Wrestling. Medusa replaces Sherry in the man vs. woman match against Colonel Parker. Sherry was fired because she was supposed to do an angle on Nitro on February 12, where she took either a hammer or a baseball bat and destroyed Parker's Cadillac. However, she was in no condition to do the angle. Also, Johnny B. Bad vs. Dallas Page in an I Quit match, Chris Benoit vs. Randy Savage in a Falls Count Anywhere match, Giant vs. Loch Ness Monster, Conan defends the U.S. title against Eddie Guerrero, and Steve Regal faces David Finlay. On paper it looks like a mixed bag. Major events wrestling calendar February 23rd to March 23rd. February 24th WWF East Rutherford, New Jersey Continental Arena, Bret Hart vs. Diesel vs. Undertaker. February 25th WWF Pittsburgh Civic Arena, Bret Hart vs. Diesel vs. Undertaker. February 25th New Japan Tokyo Sumo Hall, Muto and Liger vs. Takada and Sano. February 26th WCW Monday Nitro tapings, Knoxville Civic Coliseum, Hogan and Savage and Bootyman vs. Flair and Anderson and Sullivan. March 1st New Japan UWFI Tokyo Budokan Hall, Takada vs. Koshinaka. March 2nd All Japan Tokyo Budokan Hall, Misawa vs. Albright. March 2nd Pancrase Kobe Fashion Art Atrium Plaza, Rudin vs. Mesger. March 8th ECW Queens New York Lost Battalion Hall. March 9th ECW Philadelphia ECW Arena. March 10th WWF Superstars taping Corpus Christi, Texas. March 11th WWF Monday Night Raw tapings San Antonio, Texas. March 11th WCW Monday Nitro tapings Winston-Salem, North Carolina Lawrence Joel Coliseum. March 17th WWF New York Madison Square Garden, Bret Hart and Undertaker vs. Michaels and Diesel. March 18th WCW Monday Nitro tapings Chattanooga, Tennessee UC Arena. March 20th New Japan Nagoya Aichi Gymnasium. Results. February 4th Sydney, Australia, Australian Pro Wrestling. One night tourney for Roy Heffernan Trophy. Jumping Josh B. TNT Kid, Lofty Pickford B. Ken Kane, Gregory Smeet, Pancrase B. Red Flair, Blade Runner B. Maximum Thunder, Josh B. Pickford, Smeet B. Blade Runner, Smeet B. Josh. February 11th Newport, Vermont, Green Mountain Wrestling, 250 sellout. Curtis Slamdog B. Red Ninja, Bobby Pininsky B. Pretty Boy Floyd, Mercenary B. Winnie the Grizzly, Bob Evans B. Joel Davis, Maverick Wild B. Sonny Goodspeed, Mercenary B. Slamdog, Lord Penguin and Grizzly B. Jerry Myers and Denny Cormier DQ. Davis won Battle Royal. February 11th Houma, Louisiana, Mid-South Wrestling, 200 Southern Patriot B. Crazy Joe, TJ Sullivan B. Steve Diamond, Mustang Mike B. Mr. President, Sandman, not original, The Bronco Bob, Al Savage B. Mike, Frankie Jeffrey Richie Valentine, Half-Breed B. Joe Kane DQ. February 12th Tampa, WCW Nitro taping 6,000-1,000 paid, Dick Slater and Bunkhouse Buck B. Barrio Brothers, Meng and Barbarian B. Joey Maggs and Buddy Lee Parker, Jim Duggan B. Mark Starr, WCW TV title, Johnny B. Bad B. Diamond Dallas Page, Randy Savage B. Hugh Morris 1 1/4 stars, Loch Ness Monster B. Scotty Riggs 1 star, Conan B. Devon Storm 3 stars, Arnold Anderson B. Hulk Hogan 1 1/2 star. February 13th Kurashiki New Japan, 3,150 Yuji Nagata B. Yu Takayoshi Kunyaki Kobayashi B. Tatsuhito Takaiwa Akira Nagami B. Black Cat, El Samurai and Black Tiger B. Tokumitsu Ishizawa and Shinjiro Otani, Osamu Nishimura and Kensuke Sasaki B. Tadao Yasuda and Takashi Iizuka, Shinya Hashimoto and Satoshi Kojima B. Kengo Kimura and Michiyoshi Ohara, Keiji Muto and Jushin Liger B. Koji Kanemoto and Junji Hirata, Hiro Saito and Hiroyoshi Tenzan B. Akitoshi Saito and Shiro Koshinaka. February 13th Hisarizu WAR, Carol Midori and Yasha Kurenai B. Keiko Aono and Rumi Kazama, Lion Dubi Kamikaze, Jado and Geto B. Osamu Teitoko and Arashi, Yuji Yasu Ryoka B. Negro Casas, Shinichi Nakano B Koki Kitahara, Hiramichi Fuyuki B Nobutaka Araya, Grand Naniwa and Masaki Mochizuki B Battle Ranger and Takashi Okamura. February 14th Atlanta Center Stage, WCW Saturday Night Tapings, 785 sellout / all freebies. Non-squash results, Ric Flair and Arnold Anderson B Nasty Boys. Loch Ness Monster B Marcus Bagwell. David Finlay B Brad Armstrong DQ. WCW Tag Titles, Sting and Lex Luger B David Taylor and Bobby Eaton. Chris Benoit B Joey Maggs. One Man Gang B Pez Watley. WCW TV Title, Bad B Benoit DQ. Conan B Scott Armstrong. Craig Pittman Dallas Page. WCW Tag Titles, Sting and Luger B Public Enemy. Scott Norton D Ice Train. Conan B Brad Armstrong. February 14th Cure New Japan, 2350 Tokumitsu Ishizawa B Takayoshi Koji Kanemoto B Black Cat. Takashi Iizuka and Akira Nagami B Osamu Nishimura and Yuji Nagata. Kengo Kimura B Osamu Kido. Jushin Liger and El Samurai B Shinjiro Otani and Tatsuhiro Takaiwa and Shinjiro Otani. Kensuke Sasaki B Akitoshi Saito, Shiro Koshinaka and Michiyoshi Ohara and Kunyaki Kobayashi B Tadao Yasuda and Junji Hirata and Shinya Hashimoto. Keiji Muto and Satoshi Kojima B Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Hiro Saito. February 14th Memphis, USWA, 1100, Spellbinder B Rodney Crew, USWA Women's Title, Miss Texas B Tasha Simone. Bull Rope Match, Doug Gilbert B Tex Slazenger, USWA Tag Titles, Jesse James Armstrong and Tracy Smothers B PG-13 to win titles. USWA Title, Ryan Christopher B Tommy Rich to win title. Spellbinder 1 Battle Royal, Jerry Lawler and Jeff Jarrett B Undertaker and Bret Hart DQ. February 14th Fukaya War, 1100 Kurula Harley Saito, and Rumi Kazama B Keiko Aono and Mizuki Endo Osamu Teitoko B Takashi Kimura. Yujiyasu Ryoka B Battle Ranger, Grand Naniwa and Negro Casas and Ultimo Dragon D Masaaki Mochizuki and Lion Do, Chris Jericho and Gedo 30 Minutes, Koki Kitahara B Shinichi Nakano Jado and Hiramichi Fuyuki B Nobutaka Araya and Arashi. February 15th Maru Kame New Japan, 2400, Tatsuhito Takaiwa B Yuji Nagata Dean Malenko and Osamu Kido B Black Cat and El Samurai, Kunyaki Kobayashi and Kengo Kimura B Tadao Yasuda and Akira Nagami, Osamu Nishimura B Akitoshi Saito, Jushin Liger and Black Tiger B Shinjiro Otani and Koji Kanemoto, Riki Choshu and Satoshi Kojima B Shiro Koshinaka and Michiyoshi Ohara, Shinya Hashimoto and Junji Hirata B Hiro Saito and Hiroyoshi Tenzan, Keiji Muto and Kensuke Sasaki B Kazuo Yamazaki and Takashi Iizuka. February 15th Niage, FMW, Kaori Nakayama B Aki Kanbayashi Megumi Kudo B Yukari Ishikura, Shoichi Funaki and Takamichi Noku B The Shooter and Koji Nakagawa, Street Fight, Shark Tsuchiya and Bad Nurse Nakamura B Yuki Nabano and Combat Toyota, Hideki Hasaka and Haido and Wing Kanemura and Super Leather, Mike Kirchner, Bigasaku Goshigawara and Tetsuhiro Kuroda and Katsutoshi Niyama and Masato Tanaka, Street Fight, Mr. Pogo B Jason the Terrible, Roberto Rodriguez, Bunkhouse Death Match, Mitsuhiro Matsunaga B Horace Boulder. February 15th Cartersville, Georgia Power Slam Wrestling, 100, Rob McBride B Big Huff, John Arden B Demon of Destruction, Dustin Dodson B Billy Montana, Bubba Humphries B Ken Arden DQ, Ken and John Arden and McBride and Billy Montana B Huff and Demon and Humphries and Dodson. February 15th Bakersfield, California, Slammers, Jimmy James B Buddy West, Movie star Mike B Vern Langdon DQ, Bruce Bodine won 4 corners match, Tyrone Littler Hombre de Oro, Samoan Kid and Kano the Islander B Dynamite D and Sue the Gargoyle. February 15th Shelbyville, Tennessee, Allstate Wrestling, 154, Franklin B Smooth Operator, Jason Vaughn B Lawrence, Robbie Rage B Regina Hale, Glenn Mullins B Farron Square, Steve Neely and Gypsy Joe B Hot Chocolate and Chris Kearns, Sir Mo, as in the real one, B Ben Mullins. February 16th Nashville, WWF, Tatanka B Barry Horowitz, Bodwins B Body Donnas, Ringmaster, Steve Austin B Savio Vega, Unified Title, Ahmed Johnson B Jeff Jarrett DQ, Yokozuna B Davey Boy Smith, Duke Drosy B 123 Kid, Shawn Michaels B Owen Hart, IC Title, Undertaker B Goldust Core, Cage Match for WWF Title, Bret Hart B Jerry Lawler. February 16th Mexico City, AAA, Super Raton and Vegas Split Battle Royal, One Night Trios Tournament, Jerry Estrada and Cybernetico and Pierroth Jr. B Retador and Angel Satanico and Mr. Jack, Volador and El Mexicano and Alcon Dorado Jr. B Gallego and Bronco and Rocky Santana Core, Cien Cars and Latin Lover and Heavy Metal be La Parca and Rey Mysterio Jr. and Frisbee, Vegas and Yeti and Killer be Raton and Super Muñeco and Super Pinocho, Estrada and Cibernetico and Pierroth Jr. be Volador and Mexicano and Dorado Jr. Cars and Heavy and Latin be Vegas and Yeti and Killer, Cars and Heavy and Latin be Estrada and Cibernetico and Pierroth Jr. to win tournament. February 16th Mexico City Arena Coliseo, EMLL, Mr. Niebla and Shocker and Mascara Magica be Astro Jr. and Felino and El Signo, El Texano and Hector Garza and Atlantis be Dr. Wagner Jr. and El Satanico and Bestia Salvaje, Hair vs. Hair, Americo Rocca be Ringo Mendoza. Dos Cars and Dandy and Leo del Santo be Emilio Charles Jr. and Blue Panther and Apollo Dantes DQ. February 16th Kumamoto FMW, Yukari Shakura be Aki Kambayashi, Hideki Hasaka and Jason the Terrible be Gasaku Goshigawara and Tetsuhiro Kuroda, Shoichi Funaki and Takamichi Noku be the Shooter and Koji Nakagawa, Street Fight, Bad Nurse Nakamura and Shark Tsuchiya be Megumi Kudo and Kaori Nakayama, Mr. Pogo be Ricky Fuji, No Rope Barbed Wire Barricade Mat Double Hell Death Match, Mitsuhiro Matsunaga and Wing Kanemura and Super Leather be Katsutoshi Niyama and Masato Tanaka and Horace Boulder. February 16th Minami Atami, WAR, Mikiko Futagami and Yasha Kurenai be Keiko Aono and Carol Midori, Osamu Teitoko and Nobutaka Araya be Kamikaze and Lance Storm, Koki Kitahara be Shinichi Nakano, Yuji Yasurioka and Arashi be Jado and Hiramichi Fuyuki Ultimo Dragon and Negro Casas be Battle Ranger and Takashi Okamura, Lion-Do and Geto be Grand Naniwa and Masaaki Mochizuki. February 16th Tokyo Korakuen Hall, Gia, 1550 Toshie Uematsu and Nakano be Tomoko Kuzumi and Chikeo Nagashima, Michiko Nagashima and Jen Yukari and Eagle Sawai be Chigusa Nagio and Sonoka Kato and Bomber Hikari, Kaoru be Combat Toyota. February 16th Compton, California, Sergio Garcia Promotions, Hitano be Tigra Oriental, Meteoro be Fujin, Tornado Negro 2 be Rosa Salvaje, Cosmos and Ultra Estrella and Bulldog Rivera be Poison and Demolador and Acero Dorado, Crazy Boy and Falcon de Oro and Trident be Superboy and Capitan Oro and De Predador. February 16th Fall Branch, Tennessee, Southern States Wrestling, Danny Christian be Sheik White, Juice be Alan King, Tennessee Equalizer be Scott Sterling, Alex Shane be Steve Flynn, Death and Destruction be Eddie Golden and Stan Lee, Bo James and War Machine be Bobby Blaze and Ricky Morton, Eddie Bruiser be Stormtrooper, James 1 Battle Royal. February 16th Reading, Pennsylvania, AWF, Steve Stormker Scott Baker, Boink the Clown be Jonathan Lovestruck, Troy be Big Bad Bob, Georgia Love be Tiny the Hillbilly Dark Side, Chuck Williams, and Glenna Osborne be Purple Haze and Flex Wheeler, James Kaiser be Flamingo Kid, Darren Wise be Ranger 7 DQ, Johnny Gunn be Armageddon. February 16th Rossville, Georgia, TWA, Rick Justice be Keith Hart, Chuck Colt be Joel Travis, Jimmy Sharp be Mr. Payne DQ, Sharp and Widowmaker be Payne and New One Man Gang, Risk Taylor DDQ Michael Collins, Chuck Colton Collins and Johnny Blaze be Ken Arden and Sam Colton Taylor. February 17th Baltimore Arena, WCW, 11,000 8,000 paid, Alex Wright be Disco Inferno, Lights Out Street Fight, Nasty Boys be Public Enemy, Kevin Sullivan and Meng and Hugh Morris be Arnold Anderson and Chris Benoit and Scott Norton, WCW TV title, Lex Luger be Johnny be Bad to win title, The Giant be Sting, WCW title, Ric Flair be Randy Savage. February 17th Memphis, WWF, 7,500 Ringmaster be Savio Vega, Brian Christopher be Tatanka, Yokozuna be Davey Boy Smith, Duke Drosy be 1-2-3 Kid, Tommy Rich and Doug Gilbert won triangular tag match over Bodydonas and Godwin's unified title, Ahmed Johnson be Jeff Jarrett Core, Shawn Michaels be Owen Hart, cage match for WWF title, Bret Hart be Jerry Lawler, IC title, Bulldust be Yokozuna DQ. February 17th Philadelphia ECW Arena, ECW 1,300 sellout, Bad Crew and Judge Dredd be Dino Sendoff and Donnie Allen and Dirt Bike Kid Dud, Spiros Greco, Rico Federico, BL Puerto Rican 1 1/2 star, Taz be Joel Hart Good Dud, Bubba Ray Dudley be Mr. Hughes 1 1/2 star, Bruise Brothers be Headhunters 2.5 stars, JT Smith be Axel Rotten 1 1/2 star, Dog Collar Match, Pit Bulls and Francine be Eliminators and Stevie Richards 3 1/2 stars, ECW TV title 2 Cold Scorpio D Sabu 30 minutes 4 1/4 stars, Shane Douglas be Cactus Jack 3 1/2 stars, ECW title, Raven be Sandman 2.5 stars. February 17th Tokyo Korakuen Hall, All Japan, 2,100 sellout, Satoru Asako be Bobby Bradley Jr., Abdullah the Butcher and Giant Kimala 2, Ben Peacock. Be Masao Inoue and Yoshinari Ogawa, Dan Crawford and Doug Furness beat Tsuyoshi Kikuchi and Dory Funk, Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momoto be Ryukaku Izumida and Haruka Eigen and Masafuchi 22-25, Jun Akiyama and Manukia Mossman be Toshiaki Kawada and Kentaro Shiga 21-23, Johnny Ace and the Patriot be Akira Tao and Takawa Mori, Mitsuharu Misawa and Kena Kobashi and Tamon Honda be Stan Hansen and Gary Albright and Rob Van Dam. February 17, Minami Ashikaga, New Japan 2750 sellout, Black Cat be Yutaka Yoshi, El Samurai be Tatsuhito Takaiwa, Akira Nagami and Takashi Iizuka be Yuji Nagata and Tadao Yasuda, Black Tiger and Gran Hamada and Jushin Liger be Dean Malenko and Shinjiro Otani and Tokumitsu Ishizawa, Michiyoshi Ohara and Kengo Kimura be Osamu Nishimura and Kensuke Sasaki, Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Hiro Saito be Keiji Muto and Koji Kanemoto, Satoshi Kojima and Shinya Hashimoto and Junji Hirata be Shiro Koshinaka, and Kuniaki Kobayashi and Akitoshi Saito. February 17, Bofu, FMW, Kaori Nakayama be Aki Kanbayashi, Jason the Terrible be Tetsuhiro Kuroda, Taka Michinoku and Shoichi Funaki be Shooter and Koji Nakagawa, Bad Nurse Nakamura and Shark Tsuchiya be Yukari Ishikura and Megumi Kudo, Hideki Hasaka and Haido and Wing Kanemura be Gasaku Goshigawara and Masato Tanaka and Katsutoshi Niyama, No Rope Barbed Wire Street Fight Tornado Death Match Super Leather and Mitsuhiro Matsunaga be Ricky Fuji and Horace Boulder. February 17, Tajimi, All Japan Women 1730, Yumi Fukawa be Keo Nomi, Yukishina be Mari Mogami, Tashio Yamada and Yoshiko Tamura and Misae Watanabe be Kumiko Makawa and Nobu Endo and Mina Tanayama, Etsuko Mita and Reggie Bennett and Tomoko Watanabe be Manami Toyota and Mariko Yoshida and Kaoru Ito, Saki Hasegawa be Shaparita Asari, Kyoko Inoue and Takako Inoue be Yumiko Hata and Mima Shimoda. February 17, Nagarayama, WAR, Norio Tadano and Michiko Omukai be Okino and Mizuki Endo, Orashi be Kamikaze, Koki Kitahara be Shinichi Nakano, Ultimo Dragon and Negro Casas and Masaaki Mochizuki be Landstorm and Yuji Yasuryoka and Gran Naniwa, Hiramichi Fuyuki and Jado be Nobutaka Araya and Osamu Teitoko, Geto and Lion do be Battle Ranger and Takashi Okamura. February 17, Chattanooga, Tennessee, United Wrestling TV taping, 900/papered, Bill Dundee be Lee Thomas, Mike Golden be Davey Rich, Jack Lord. So it's come to this for him be War Machine Terry Gordy be Lord. Dirty White Boy be Bull Leduc, Thomas be Mike Mitchell, Golden be Dion. Rich be Dundee DQ, Gordy be Machine DQ, White Boy be Lord, Dion be Mitchell, War Machine be Leduc. February 17, North Miami Beach, Florida, Sunshine Wrestling Federation, 240, Johnny Torres be Manable the Cannibal, J.R. James and Matt Otto be Greg Fisk and Young Glory, Steve Collins be Vampire Warrior, David Heath, Andre Moore be Mike Laria, Demon Hellstorm, the Executioner, Knight Rider 1 Battle Royal. February 17, Donovan, Missouri, North American All-Star Wrestling, 450, Reggie Montgomery be Charlie Parker, Buddy Murray be Dirty Little Dave, Giant Warrior be Justin St. John DQ, Colorado Kid be Gator McAllister, Kid 1 Battle Royal. February 17, Tampa, Inside Out Wrestling, Steve Sully be Death Metal, Buck Quartermain be Manny Fernandez, Not Original, Buddy Valentine Cordell Apollo, Jim Magnum be Howler Rathbone and Danny Palmer, Bounty Hunters Rick Thames and Sonny T. February 17, Tampa, Florida Wrestling Federation, Nasty Nina be Sweet Linda, Donnie York Jr. be Lightning Kid, Slick Willie and Barry Laughlin be Terry Anderson and John Force, Cliff Anderson be American Samurai, It Men be Nasty Ned Brady, and Dirty Dave, Al Hardiman be Navy SEAL. February 17, South Pittsburgh, Tennessee, ABWF, 89, Keith Arden be Dakota Outlaw, Billy Montana and Ken Arden be Alex Davis and CM Quick, Patriot, Not Original, be Black Terminator, Bill Tabb, Larry Santo be Glamour Boy. February 17, Wiener, Arkansas, WON Leon Downs be Shogun Assassin, Deja Vu be Starchild, Dixie Dragon be Andrew Long, Spanish Fly be Chris Robertson, Cadillac Brothers be Andy and Louis Charisma, Freezer Thompson and Robertson NC Fly and Street Hawk. February 17, Middlesboro, Kentucky, Capital Pro Wrestling, Master be Steve Cario, Paul the Giant and Rick Connors be Tank and Regulator Steel, Kid Lightning be Black Shadow, Tony Pritchard and Lone Star be Fools and Lawrence Hutton, Eric Rose and Jess Ellis be Dr. Dan and Orderly, Bobby Blaze beat Regulator Stone. February 17, Roxborough, North Carolina, Alternative Championship Wrestling, Hammer and David Blanchard be Hot Stuff and Max Rhodes, Dr. Lee Love be Nighthawk, Dale Porter be Rick Link Core, Mad Dog Davidson be LA Wild 1, Bone Crusher be Dan Cooley, Terminators be Frank Parker and Roger Anderson, Jimmy Valiant and Brian Bruce be Tim Blaze and Rusty Allen. February 18, Norfolk WCW 9, 506ths, 487 paid, Alex Wright be Disco Inferno, Lights Out Street Fight, Nasty Boys be Public Enemy, Kevin Sullivan and Meng and Hugh Morris be Arnold Anderson and Chris Benoit and Scott Norton, WCW TV title, Johnny B. Bad be Lex Luger to regain title, The Giant be Sting, WCW title, Ric Flair be Randy Savage. February 18, Tokyo Korakuen Hall, New Japan, 2100 sellout Tatsuhito Takaiwa be Yutaka Yoshi, Black Cat and Dean Malenko be Black Tiger and El Samurai, Takashi Iizuka be Tadao Yasuda, Osamu Kido be Gran Hamada, Shinjiro Otani and Koji Kanemoto and Kensuke Sasaki be Tokumitsu Ishizawa and Yuji Nagata and Kazuo Yamazaki, Satoshi Kojima and Osamu Nishimura be Akitoshi Saito and Michiyoshi Ohara, Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Hiro Saito be Jushin Liger and Keiji Muto, Kunyaki Kobayashi and Kengo Kimura and Shiro Koshinaka be Akira Nagami and Junji Hirata and Shinya Hashimoto. February 18, Tokyo Korakuen Hall, All Japan, 2100 sellout Yoshinari Ogawa be Kentaro Shiga, Dory Funk be Mighty Inoue, Masa Fuchi and Haruka Eigen be Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momota, Dan Crawford and Doug Furness be Rob Van Dam and Bobby Bradley, All Asian Tag Title, Jun Akiyama and Takao Omori be Tamon Honda and Ryukaku Izumida 27-21, Johnny Ace and the Patriot be Gary Albright and Manukia Mossman, Stan Hansen and Giant Baba be Abdullah the Butcher and Giant Kimala 2, Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi be Mitsuharu Misawa and Kena Kobashi and Satoru Asako 24-02. February 18, Kasuoka, All Japan Women, 1350, Mina Tanayama be Ko Nomi, Misai Watanabe be Mari Mogami, Saki Hasegawa and Yumi Fukawa and Nobu Endo be Kumiko Makawa and Yuka Shina and Yoshiko Tamura, Reggie Bennett and Atsuko Mita and Shaparita Asari be Mima Shimoda and Kyoko Inoue and Takako Inoue, Yumiko Hata be Mariko Yoshida, Manami Toyota and Kaoru Ito be Tomoko Watanabe and Tashio Yamada. February 19, Cincinnati, WWF Monday Night Raw tapings, 8,500 non-squash results, Jake Roberts be Isaac Yankem, Amanda Johnson be Shinobi, Al Snow handicap match, Yokozuna be Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith Core, Shawn Michaels be 1-2-3 Kid, Justin Bradshaw be Hakushi, Bret Hart be Hunter Hearst Helmsley, IC title, Razor Ramon be Goldust Core, Ringmaster be Marty Jannetty, Undertaker be Tatanka Arm Wrestling, Johnson be Smith DQ, Diesel be Bob Holly, Cage match, Duke Drosy be Helmsley, Diesel and Michaels be Roberts and Undertaker. February 20th Morioka All Japan, 2950, Tsuyoshi Kikuchi be Bobby Bradley, Rob Van Dam be Masao Inoue, Kentaro Shiga and Satoru Asako be Manukia Mossman and Yoshinari Ogawa, Mighty Inoue and Haruka Eigen and Masa Fuchi be Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momota 2017, Abdullah the Butcher and Giant Kimala 2 be Takao Omori and Dory Funk, The Patriot and Johnny Ace be Dan Crawford and Doug Furness, Kena Kobashi and Jun Akiyama be Mitsuharu Misawa and Tamon Honda 2034, PWF and International Tag Titles, Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao be Gary Albright and Stan Hansen to win titles 2053. Special thanks to Juan Lemieux, Scott Hudson, Sarah Moore, Roy Lucier, Greg John, Edie Bailey, Bart Orkline, Peggy Watkins, Gary Langevin, Bernard Siegel, Dominic Valenti, Faye Ferguson, Paul Spiegel, Jason Meyer, Ken Dunlop, Adam Pennison, Tony Friedman, Jesse Money, Steve Prozik, Ken McBride, Tim Papp. Japanese Television Rundown. January 21st. All Japan. 1. Kawada beat Honda in 1456 with an Achilles tendon submission. Started slow but some good mat wrestling spots where they did amateur style and worked for submissions. 2 stars. 2. Misawa and Kobashi and Akiyama beat Hansen and Albright in Bobby Duncombe Jr. when Akiyama pinned Duncombe with a captured suplex, similar to a Northern Lights but not holding the bridge. Very good. The highlight was seeing how much Albright has improved in his ability to work with all 3 of the members of the Japanese team. 3.5 stars. January 28th. All Japan. 1. Yoshinari Ogawa retained the PWF Junior title, pinning Rex King in about 19 minutes. It was sloppy in spots and good in other spots early. It turned into a good match with good crowd heat the last several minutes. 3 stars. 2. Tao pinned Masao Inoue with the Nadawa in 7:24. 1.5 star. February 4th, All Japan. 1. Hansen and Albright won the double tag title from Kawada and Tao in 24 minutes. This was a hard-fought match with a lot of stiff blows and great suplexes by Albright. Overall, because of the length and because the style doesn't allow for gimmicks and a somewhat lack of crowd heat, it was just an okay match with a very exciting finish as Albright gave Kawada a great unprotected German suplex, and Hansen lariated him for the pin. 3 stars. February 11th, All Japan. 1. Patriot and Eagle beat Izumida and Honda when Eagle pinned Izumida with a German suplex. All 4 worked hard, but overall just an average bout. 2 stars. 2. Misawa and Kobashi beat Akiyama and Baba. Akiyama was the star of the show here, although Misawa and Kobashi looked as good as usual. The gimmick of the rare Baba appearance with the Hot Workers seemed to get over okay, but at 58 years old and being so physically limited, it really requires major suspension of disbelief. Misawa and Kobashi worked great given Baba's limitations. Finish saw Akiyama get several near falls on Misawa and then kick out of several big moves by Kobashi before Kobashi pinned him after a moonsault. Akiyama is moving up the list of the best workers in the business. 4 stars. February 11th, All Japan Women. 1. Asia Kong pinned Kaoru Ito with a Huracan backhand punch in 16:05. This was a great match, but it was hurt because the crowd was dead. All kinds of big moves back and forth, highlighted with Ito doing a double foot stomp from the top rope to Kong on the floor. 3.5 stars. 2. Saki Hasegawa pinned Bull Nakano in 11:47 with a rolling savate. Hasegawa did a running flip dive over the top early. She also juiced early from chair shots. 3.25 stars. 3. Kyoko Inoue and Takako Inoue captured the WWA tag titles from Akira Hokuto and Mima Shimoda in a 2 out of 3 falls match. After Hokuto and Shimoda did a double fisherman buster on Kyoko, Hokuto made her submit to the power strangle in 10:30. Second fall saw Kyoko pin Shimoda with the Niagara driver in 9:23. Third fall saw Kyoko pin Hokuto with a double team move, ending with Takako doing a choke slam off the top on Hokuto in 3:43. This match was fantastic. The only drawback was it peaked too soon. By the end of the second fall it seemed like an easy match of the year candidate. Since the third fall was so short, they did nothing but near falls, but the crowd, which was going nuts in the second fall, hadn't recovered from their exuberance and ultimate pop with the final pinfall, and that way the match was flawed. From a psychology standpoint, having 2 long early falls, especially throwing so much at the crowd during the second fall, and then doing a short third fall is hard to pull off. It's interesting to note that Shimoda totally carried the match for her team and has surpassed Hokuto as a worker. Hokuto was still good, but right now Shimoda probably ranks behind only Toyota and Kyoko Inoue when it comes to female workers. 4.5 stars. 4. Manami Toyota retained the WWA title, pinning Yumiko Hata in 17:47 with a Niagara driver, which is the finisher of Kyoko Inoue, her next title challenger. Only 7 minutes aired on television, but based on what aired, this match was a major disappointment. It was Toyota's worst performance in years. She may have been hurting, what a shock, because she didn't do much high risk, but the match never picked up past the good level and the finish looked downright clumsy. 2.5 stars. EMLL. The main event on February 16th at Arena Coliseo saw Dos Carson Dandy and El Hijo del Santo beat Blue Panther and Emilio Charles Jr. and Apollo Dantes via DQ when the Rudos triple-teamed Santo for the DQ in the second fall. They seemed to build the match around Santo and Charles. The semifinal saw Americo Rocca over Ringo Mendoza in a hair versus hair match when Mendoza missed a plancha and Rocca beat him with a half crab. In the other key match, El Texano and Atlantis and Hector Garza beat Dr. Wagner Jr. and Bestia Salvaje and El Satanico when Garza made Wagner submit to the upside-down rocking horse to keep their program alive. AAA. Not much in the way of news, although the second part of the Trios tournament took place on February 16th in Mexico City with Heavy Metal and Latin Lover and Cien Caras winning the tournament, beating Pierroth Jr. and Cibernetico and Jerry Estrada in the finals. The Heavy Metal team beat Rey Mysterio Jr. and La Parca and Frisbee in the first round and beat Vegas and Yeti and Killer in the semifinal. The win gives them a match against the first tournament winner last week, Los Villanos, to become the first AAA Trios champions. The only angle in the tournament involved Angel Mortal, who has been out of action since before Christmas when he was shot in a street fight. Mortal made his first appearance since the shooting, sitting at ringside at the show waving an AAA banner. During the second match on the card, UWA Rudos Rocky Santana and Bronco joined in with Mortal's former tag partner Gallego to attack him at ringside and beat him unmercifully where he juiced heavy and did a stretcher job. All Japan. Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao regained the double tag team titles from Stan Hansen and Gary Albright on February 20th in Morioka when Tao pinned Hansen after the Nadawa choke slam in 2053 before 2,950 fans. This sets up Kawada and Tao's first title defense on March 2nd at Budokan Hall against Kenta Kobashi and Jun Akiyama, which, given all the dynamics, a renewed push for Akiyama, who will likely put on a show before eventually doing the job, may be a match of the year candidate. Kobashi and Akiyama beat Mitsuharu Misawa and Tamon Honda in the semi-final when Akiyama pinned Honda in 2034. The new tour opened with sellouts on February 17th and February 18th at Korakuen Hall. Bobby Bradley from Southern California debuted on this tour as Rob Van Dam's tag team partner, losing to Satoru Asako in the opener the first night and with Van Dam losing to Dan Crawford and Doug Furnace the second night. Bradley and Van Dam had formed a tag team with the defunct NWC out of Las Vegas. Usual opening match wrestlers Kentaro Shiga and Manukia Mossman got to work high on the card the first night as Mossman and Akiyama beat Shiga and Kawada. First night main event saw Misawa and Kobashi and Honda over Hansen and Albright and Van Dam in 2044 when Honda pinned Van Dam. February 18th saw Akiyama and Takao Omori retain the All-Asian Tag title beating Ryukaku Izumida and Honda in 27-21, while Mossman, who is only 20 years old, again worked high on the card teaming with Albright to lose to Johnny Ace and the Patriot. Main on that show was the typical six-man with Kawada and Akira Tao and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi over Misawa in Kobashi and Asako in 24-02 when Asako was pinned. New Japan. While nothing has been announced publicly, New Japan is working on a show on April 29th at the Tokyo Dome which would be headlined by Nobuhiko Takada defending the IWGP title against Shinya Hashimoto in what could likely be a title switch. There is speculation the show would include part of the WCW Cruiserweight tournament and they are working on getting a big-name UFC competitor such as Chemo to face Keiji Muto. It appears they are going to turn Akira Nagami heel and have him join Heisei Ishgun. On the February 18th show at Korakuen Hall in the main event, Nagami and Junji Hirata and Hashimoto were facing Shiro Koshinaka and Kengo Kimura and Kunyaki Kobayashi. Hashimoto had Kimura in trouble and was going for a DDT when Nagami turned on him and broke it up, allowing Kimura to hit Hashimoto with a leg lariat for the pin. Hashimoto yelled at Nagami after the match, and Nagami simply walked away. At the show on February 19th in Shizuoka, Hashimoto said he had met with Nagami but that their differences weren't resolved. Nagami beat Kobayashi in a hair versus hair match 2 weeks ago, and it appears they'll turn the two into a regular tag team. Satoshi Kojima is already regularly main eventing. The March 26th show at Tokyo Gymnasium will be an 8-team one-night tournament. The only team announced is Muto and Kensuke Sasaki, although they've announced that WCW, most likely Harlem Heat, War, Hiromichi Fuyuki and Geto most likely, and UWFI, Yoshihiro Takayama and Yoji Anjo most likely, would all be sending teams. There is a rumor that Genichiro Tenryu and Tatsumi Fujinami will team up on this show. With the Heisei Ishgun group dominating the top of the cards, the highlight matches every night are junior heavyweight mid-card matches with the likes of Black Tiger, Dean Malenko, Jushin Liger, Shinjiro Otani, Koji Kanemoto, etc. Other Japan notes. The March 2nd Pancrase lineup in Kobe will be Boss Rutan vs. Guy Mesger, Frank Shamrock vs. Ryushi Yanagisawa, Minoru Suzuki vs. Yusuke Fuke, Ken Shamrock vs. Asami Shibuya, Masakatsu Funaki vs. Katsumi Inagaki, Jason DeLucia vs. Yoshiki Takahashi and Takafumi Ito vs. Kunyoku. War has been drawing poor crowds throughout this tour which has been headlined by a junior heavyweight tag team tournament. The group has also banned weekly pro wrestling from press credentials at its events, so don't expect any acknowledgement in that magazine that this group even exists. There is a lot of talk that the group is in trouble, as since Genichiro Tenryu stopped working on the spot towns, attendance on the road has gotten poor, not that it was great to begin with. Jushin Liger and Tatsuhito Takaiwa will challenge the winners of the current tournament on February 26th at Korakuen Hall. Next War Tour is March 19th to March 31st with Big Titan, Dr. Luther, Damien, Lance Storm, and Lion Hart. Soon-to-be-retired Saki Hasegawa will face Chigusa Nagio on the GM main event on March 8th at Korakuen Hall. Gia ran February 16 at Korakuen Hall with a soon-to-be-retired Combat Toyota FMW losing to Kaoru in the main event. LLPW sent Michiko Nagashima and Jen Yukari and Eagle Sawai for an interpromotional match where they beat the Gia trio of Nagio and Bomber Hikari and Sonoka Kato. Bart Valley will be entered in the K1 1996 tournament, which starts on March 10 at the Yokohama Arena. Valley's first-round match will be against Andy Hug. No other types affiliated with pro wrestling or have done UFCs are in the tournament this year. In FMW, with Hayabusa out of action for a long time after a series of operations, on this tour they did an angle where Riki Fuji's group and the regular FMW group joined together to feud with the Wings group headed by Mitsuhiro Matsunaga. Minoru Tanaka and Daisuke Ikeda of Battle Arts Promotions will be going to South Africa for a March tour in conjunction with several Canadian wrestlers. USWA The Weekend television show was heavily focused on WWF performers, building up the WWF show on February 17 at the Mid-South Coliseum. The show, which also included USWA wrestlers Brian Christopher, Tommy Rich, and Doug Gilbert, and was headlined by Bret Hart keeping the WWF title, beating Jerry Lawler in a cage match, set what may have been the all-time record gate in Memphis, doing $90,000 on nearly 8,000 paid. There have been many larger paid crowds, but when it comes to dollars, I believe in the mid-80s the WWF came into Memphis and did a figure near that with Hogan and Piper in their heyday, and recall in 1985 that Lawler and Ric Flair headlined a combined NWA and CWA, as USWA was called then, that did $80,000. On the Memphis television show where Sonny and the Body Donnas, Ahmed Johnson, and Tatanka, plus they had taped interviews with Bret Hart. The irony of all this is that the USWA television show is a part of the WCW network when it comes to syndicated advertising. 3 title changes over the past week in USWA. On the February 14 USWA show in Memphis, which drew only 1,100 fans and $7,800 despite a main event of Lawler and Jeff Jarrett versus Undertaker and Bret Hart, with Undertaker hitting the ref for the DQ in 6 minutes, although they brawled for a long time after the match. Christopher won the USWA belt back from Rich and Tracy Smothers, and Jesse James Armstrong regained the tag titles from PG-13. However, the belts went back to PG-13 on the February 17 television show when Smothers went to hit Wolfie D with a flagpole, but he moved and he ended up hitting Armstrong, who was pinned. After the match, Armstrong and manager Brandon Baxter, who appears to have replaced Scott Bowden since he wasn't around, which is too bad since he's hilarious, started arguing, and it wound up with Smothers hitting Armstrong with a flagpole from behind, so Armstrong has turned babyface. It was funny because as Smothers was beating Armstrong, instead of the usual crew of USWA jobbers and Randy Hales breaking things up, they had all the officials like Dave Heckner in their sports coats running around. Sonny came out and told announcers Lance Russell and Dave Brown that they were out of shape and that the Body Donnas were going to beat up on the hometown boys. Christopher also did an angle with Tatanka to build up their singles match and wound up brawling in the studio. Next USWA house show in Memphis isn't until February 28. ECW Sabu and Too Cold Scorpio stole the show at the February 17 ECW Arena card in Philadelphia, which reportedly drew 1,300 fans. The two went to a 30-minute draw in an ECW TV title match, which should air on television in about a week or two. The highlight spot was Sabu running across the ring, jumping onto a chair, then onto the top rope, doing a flip dive off the top onto Scorpio through a table which was in the crowd. Reports we got on the match ranged from 4 stars to 4.5 stars. It was part of an internet convention, which was considered a success even though weather forced cancellation of a February 16 show in Newark, Delaware. At the convention, Shane Douglas toned down his criticism of the WWF but still knocked it, although there was nothing either overly controversial or inside that stood out. Leon Spinks was at the show taping promos, and he actually fell asleep watching Sabu and Scorpio. The Bruise Brothers debuted replacing the Gangstas, and beat the Headhunters in a brawl which went all over the building. There was fighting among the fans and at least Ron Harris during this match. We've heard varying accounts as to what happened other than those 4 huge men were running around a building that was packed beyond belief with no more floor space and people were in the way. As we were told, for whatever this is worth, a fan punched Ron Harris first and opened up his eye and he punched back. Mustafa of the Gangstas was there, however New Jack wasn't there as he was in prison in Cobb County, Georgia, the old boss man home. No word as to why, although Paul Heyman indicated he'd continue to use him since New Jack let him know about the situation ahead of time so he could get the Bruise Brothers in for replacements. The show opened with Bad Crew and Judge Dredd beating Dirt Bike Kid and Dino Sendoff and Don E. Allen, and after the match, Sandman ran in and caned everyone. Newcomer Spiros Greco Rico Federico, a Malenko student from Florida, beat El Puerto Ricano. Taz beat Joel Hardgood, a spoof on Joel Goodhart, which is a name they've been using for years, with the Taz mission, basically a Cobra clutch, and kept it on until the medics came in. He then dumped the guy off the stretcher. Finally he had a showdown with Mikey Whipwreck, but Whipwreck was also put in the choke. Perhaps the biggest reason of many that 911 left was because Heyman wanted Taz to choke him out to get over the idea that the choke works against anyone regardless of size. Pit Bulls and Francine beat Eliminators and Stevie Richards in a dog collar match, with the highlight being Perry Saturn doing a somersault leg drop off the top of the stage to the lower part of the stage. Shane Douglas pinned Cactus Jack in a match where Whipwreck interfered and hit Jack with a chair. Douglas went nuts after the match. Brian Hildebrand, the former SMW ref, was brought in for this show, with the story being that he, Douglas and Jack all started together at Dom DiNucci's school in Pittsburgh, which is true. Raven kept the ECW title on top, beating Sandman. They did an angle where Raven's group destroyed Dreamer. Dreamer has a legit shoulder injury and will be out of action for several weeks, so they did the angle to explain his time off. Bam Bam Bigelow starts this coming week. His WWF contract doesn't expire until October, so if he were to join WCW and do the WCW/New Japan combo deal, it couldn't start until that point. The A Current Affair piece airs February 23rd. Rey Mysterio Jr. vs. Juventud Guerrera in 2 out of 3 falls should take place on both the March 8th and March 9th shows. Raven vs. Sandman will likely headline the Queen show. February 23rd in Glen Olden, Pennsylvania has Raven vs. Shane Douglas for the ECW title, Scorpio vs. Sabu for TV title, Billow vs. Cactus Jack, Sandman vs. Axel Rotten, Eliminators defend tag titles against Dudleys, Pit Bulls vs. Stevie Richards and Blue Meanie, the New Fabulous Ones, and Todd Gordon vs. Bill Alfonso, with Bigelow in Gordon's corner and Taz in Alfonso's corner, and you can see where that is going. February 24th in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania has Raven vs. Sandman for the title, Sabu vs. Cactus Falls Count Anywhere, Douglas vs. Richards, Scorpio defends TV title against Mr. Hughes. Here and there. Reports we get are that Dan Severn will be going back to Arizona and train 1 week longer for the Shamrock match than he did for Ultimate. Steve Nakata is trying to work with Art Abrams and Lou Thesz of the Cauliflower Alley Club to expand that club into Japan. They are trying to put together the announcement of the June 1st card at the March 16th CAC meeting. A clarification from last week. Antonio Inoki is currently working on bringing in Seiji Sakaguchi, Devil Masami and Chigusa Nagayo, and when Nakata listed those names, it wasn't so much he had been misled into talking about a deal that hadn't been done as much as someone else claiming credit to us that he had put it together. For those wanting a war of words here, we don't have the time nor the space to waste. Oleg Toktarov, who, actually like several of the UFC competitors, has the idea of springboarding his legit rep into the movies, has a role in a video movie called Total Force where he trains cyborgs for combat. Reports are that a lot of indie promoters are shying away from using Sabu. Tony Holden, who was one of the promoters of the freestyle fighting show in Oklahoma City last week, is also the manager of Tommy Morrison. Vampiro and Atlantis are booked on the February 23rd Compton, California show, and on March 1st they are billing the show as Luchamania with Pia Roth and Psychosis and Damien vs. La Parca and Rey Mysterio Jr. and Pilato Suicida plus Corazon de Leon Chris Jericho vs. Superboy. Jericho and Lance Storm wrestled in Compton, California before going on the War Tour, and Jericho will be working Southern California indie dates from February 27th to March 3rd. On the last show, he did an angle to set up the match with Superboy and called him a convict from Japan. Superboy worked under the ring name The Convict last year for Michinoku Pro. Ron and Brent West United Wrestling had its debut show on February 17th in Chattanooga as a television taping. Terry Gordy, Bill Dundee, Davey Rich and Dirty White Boy were the biggest names, and Joe Pedicino did the announcing. The debut show drew 900 fans. Burt Prentice's North American All-Star Wrestling has apparently buried the hatchet with USWA, as they were using USWA wrestlers on their shows when they are booked. On February 21st in Jonesboro, Arkansas, since USWA isn't running Memphis, Prentice is using Jamie Dundee, Jesse James Armstrong, and Tracy Smothers. The Spiders are back full-time. NSW and USWA will also plug each other's towns on their respective television shows in the same markets. Sunshine Wrestling Federation is running February 24th and February 25th in Coconut Creek, Florida and the Tri-City Fair Tradewinds Park. Tony Rumble's Century Wrestling Federation will be taking over at the Champs Arena in Salisbury Beach, Massachusetts starting on March 1st, which will be a public access TV show taping. Kevin Sullivan vs. Vic Steamboat headlines plus Tony Atlas. The group also runs March 2nd in Waltham, Massachusetts with Devon Storm vs. Inferno Kid and Hugh Morris underneath, and back March 9th in Salisbury with Tony Atlas vs. Dungeon Master on top. Wrestling historian Robert Edlhauser of Austria has found historical attendance claims, which aren't verified, of a crowd of 100,000 fans for a 1931 match in Athens, Greece between Jim Londos and Nicolas Koryani of Russia, and a 1936 match in Sofia, Bulgaria where Fritz Frank Frankilescu of Romania faced Dan Kolov, going to a 60-minute draw before 71,000 fans. WCW. It looks like WCW is going back into the house show business after doing $216,000 on 3 weekend dates, all headlined by Ric Flair defending against Randy Savage. The February 17th show at the Baltimore Arena drew 11,000 fans, 8,000 paid with a $102,000 gate. It was the first legit $100,000 gate for a non-pay-per-view show in the history of the company, and Jim Crockett probably hadn't done one going back to 1988. The February 18th show in Norfolk, Virginia drew 9,500 fans, 6,487 paid with a $72,133 house. The TV title changed hands twice over the weekend, with Lex Luger winning the title from Johnny B. Bad in Baltimore, but losing it back in Norfolk. The gates are doubly impressive because neither Hulk Hogan nor the Road Warriors were on either show, and because WWF just run Baltimore with every big name in the promotion and drew 5,900 paid and $87,000. The plan now is to run a major house show at the Rosemont Horizon in Chicago in early April, which would set the stage for doing local angles to build up Slamboree in the same building on May 19th. Nitro on February 19th from Salisbury, Maryland drew a sellout 4,700. 3,800 paying $41,000, as Arnold Anderson beat Hulk Hogan via DQ in 6:38. Hogan had Anderson in the figure 4 when Sullivan did a run-in and Savage ran down for the save. Since Savage runs so much faster than Sullivan, he made it to the ring first. The ref saw him, and even though he didn't touch anyone, he DQ'd Hogan, giving Anderson wins over Hogan 2 weeks in a row. The match was much worse than it sounds, as Hogan's blows were missing by a mile and Anderson was selling them anyway. I guess he has no choice. -1 star. They interviewed Steve Grissom, who drove the WCW race car to victory at the Goodies 300 in Daytona Beach on February 17th, and had Harlem Heat, Sting and Luger in the pit crew. Kind of funny to see 4 guys who are feuding working together in the crew and holding him up in the winner's circle after the race. Grissom comes off as a nice guy, but they devoted far too much time to this. Grissom, driving a Turner Network car, came back and finished 27th in the Daytona 500 the next day, which wasn't mentioned. Loch Ness Monster pinned Alex Wright in 2:22 with the elbow. Wright did about as good a job as is possible in this situation. DUD. Belfast Bruiser David Finlay pinned Brad Armstrong in 6:49 with a power slam. For 2 such good workers, this never got going. 1 1/4 stars. Finally, in the only good match on the show, Flair retained the title, pinning Savage in 11:28, 3 1/2 stars. Both had their working boots on in this match. Woman threw in the show, but Savage got it and KO'd Flair. At this point, both Sullivan and Hogan did run-ins and distracted the ref, while Anderson did a run-in as well and hit the DDT on Savage, and Flair scored the pin. Ed Leslie, under his latest ring name called the Booty Man, made the save to set up a 6-man tag for February 26th in Knoxville with Booty Man and Hogan and Savage versus Flair and Anderson and Sullivan. They never acknowledged Leslie was Zodiac just 1 week ago and acted as if he was another newcomer pretending to be Ultimate Warrior. It was probably the worst Nitro since the start. Eric Bischoff announced they were doing a cruiserweight tournament on 2 continents, theoretically in Japan as well, and mentioned Brad Armstrong. As great a worker as he is, everyone has seen him job so often, and he jobbed again in his first Nitro appearance, that putting his name in title contention only makes the new title like all the only lighter weight titles they've tried and failed to get over, because fans see them as the World Jobber Championship. Chris Benoit, category he shouldn't be in since he has top potential. Eddie Guerrero, Johnny B. Bad, Dean Malenko, Shinjiro Otani, and Jushin Liger. He also mentioned making a deal with Antonio Pena of AAA and to expect the top stars from Mexico. He never mentioned the 2 TV title switches, which only makes the fans that attended those shows live think they were ripped off with fake switches, nor mention the big crowds in Baltimore and Norfolk. To clarify a situation, Johnny Grunge was in the car with Hugh Morris when he was pulled over in Florida. Kevin Sullivan and Eric Bischoff played a rib on Grunge while in Florida and had a guy who pretended to be a cop pretend to arrest him. The gag order in talking about WWF got bigger over the past week, as WCW hotline people were told they couldn't mention WWF or anything in or about WWF. The order came from the Turner lawyers and not the WCW lawyers, who don't want anyone saying anything until after the merger goes through. The ban was somewhat rescinded in that they were allowed to give straight match results of the WWF pay-per-view show. Even though Nitro set its all-time record on February 12 with no Raw opposition, TNT actually lost the time slot to USA, which did a phenomenal 3.9 for the Westminster Dog Show. That number ties the best number Raw did in its heyday. All matches involving Pillman in syndication were erased from upcoming shows, with new matches being put in their places. Not sure what the future is for WCW Saturday night tapings. Center Stage was sold to new owners, and I guess there will either immediately or very shortly be no more wrestling. Reports we've gotten are that the Saturday night show will be moved on a rotation basis to Georgia cities like Gainesville, Albany, and Macon, although that isn't confirmed. They taped on February 14th at Center Stage. Among the highlights were Flair and Anderson beat Nasty Boys, Bruiser beat Brad Armstrong via DQ, and Bobby Eaton, David Taylor and Steve Regal all interfered to set up a rematch on Nitro. Dallas Page, after losing his money, had a man in a suit repossess his vest and overcoat. Sting and Luger kept the tag titles, beating Taylor and Eaton in a pretty good match. Bad kept the TV title, beating Benoit via DQ, and Benoit threw the ref in the way of Bad as he came off the top. Konnan kept the US title with wins over both Scott and Brad Armstrong, neither of which was said to be any good. Sting and Luger beat Public Enemy in a tag title match which was said to be really bad, and Scott and Orton drew Ice Train in a match where both shook hands after to set up them forming a tag team. The July Bash at the Beach pay-per-view show has been moved from Lake Tahoe, California to Daytona Beach. Giant pinned Sting with a choke slam on the road shows. Also on those shows, Norton replaced Pillman in 6-mans with Anderson and Benoit against Sullivan and Morrison Meng. It wound up with Norton getting pinned, and then all 5 men turned on Norton and left him laying, so set up him as a face. A 10th pay-per-view show in 1996 was added in August. Negotiations to bring in Basil DeVito, the former Titan VP, fell through. For the weekend ending February 4th, WCW did a 7.4 rating on 177 stations, while WWF didn't crack the list, so they were below a 5.1. We heard conflicting stories regarding the debut of Steve McMichael in the ring. One is that he'll debut on the WCW show in Chicago on May 19th with Mike Ditka in the corner, which should get a decent amount of national and a ton of local pub if they were to do it. The other is that the debut was moved back to June in Baltimore, and that McMichael would form a tag team with Kevin Green. The latter story was given to us with more credence, but the former makes far more sense. WWF. It was announced there would be a tag team title tournament which started February 20th in Huntington, West Virginia on the Superstars show and will air this weekend because of the injury to Billy Gunn. First round matches are Body Donnas vs. Bushwhackers, Razor Ramon and Savio Vega vs. 1-2-3 Kid and Tatanka, Godwins vs. Marty Jannetty and mystery partner who will become the New Rockers, and Hakushi and Barry Horowitz vs. Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith. Finals will be at WrestleMania on March 31st during the pregame show, which is a surprise because it cheapens the tag titles to not even have the tournament finals make the pay-per-view show. Highlights of the live Raw on February 19th before an estimated 8,500 at the Cincinnati Garden saw Ramon over Goldust via a walkout countout in an IC title match. After the match, Ramon told Goldust he wanted his ass and asked Roddy Piper to sign a rematch. He said that he likes kids and doesn't think Goldust is something kids could see. Based on the commentary, the impression was given Ramon doesn't care about the title, so it may be a non-title gimmick match at WrestleMania, like perhaps a loser leaves town if Ramon decides to go to WCW, which is a distinct possibility right now. Aldo Montoya and Horowitz were in the ring for a tag match when Vader ran in and destroyed both of them. Ringmaster, with a shaved head and shaved of his charisma as well, pinned Jannetty. Undertaker pinned Tatanka in a terrible match. During the match, Diesel took an axe and destroyed Undertaker's coffin, which apparently is now his home as well. Overall, Raw was better than Nitro, although Nitro's main event was much better than Raw's. The Billionaire Ted segment saw Larry Fling, as in Larry King, of the Billionaire News Network, BNN, interviewed Ted. It was very well produced, and made fun of Savage's thinning hair and Hogan being knocked out by a size 7 women's shoe and asked for Mondays off. When Fling started asking questions about the FTC complaint, TBS stockholders finding no record of the tens of millions in WCW losses and Hogan's salary being put on the books of a more profitable sister company, Ted pretended to have laryngitis with them, saying he must have caught it from all the people in the wrestling company who also have laryngitis. Spoof on the Turner-imposed gag order on WCW in regard to all these subjects, and said he hoped Ted wouldn't catch anything else from the people in the wrestling company. When they said that next week they'd have Nacho Man and Huckster to talk about their geriatric match at WrestleMania, Ted suddenly spoke up and said he was going to referee, thus blowing the laryngitis gimmick. In other highlights from the show, which was reported to us as overall being a weak taping, a newcomer called Herman the German was given a tryout. Jake Roberts pinned Isaac Yankem in 3:25. They had a dual interview with Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels regarding the match at WrestleMania. I believe the match will be a marathon match with no DQ, and the winner will be the one who scores the most falls in 60 minutes. Sounds like a classic on paper. Ahmed Johnson beat Shinobi, who was Al Snow under a mask. Told Snow is not going to do that as a gimmick regularly, but was just used since they needed a good worker for Johnson. But this still wasn't good. Yoko beat Smith and Hart via countout in a handicap match, after which Vader came out and they tripled on Yoko until Roberts and Johnson made the save. Michaels beat 1-2-3 Kid in a 2.5 stars match. Justin Bradshaw, John Hawk, doing a total Stan Hansen gimmick and will probably be adding the branding iron gimmick down the road as well, pinned Hakushi. In the best match of the taping, said to be 2 3/4 stars. Bret Hart beat Hunter Hearst Helmsley clean. Diesel beat Bob Holly. During the match, Undertaker came to the ring, then the lights went out and he disappeared, but appeared on the video wall saying he was the King of Mind Games. King of Mind Games is right out of SMW. Duke Drosy beat Helmsley in a cage match in 8:03. Finale was Diesel and Shawn versus Roberts and Undertaker. Undertaker and Diesel brawled to back before the match ever got started, making it a singles match, and Michaels scored the pin with a superkick in 2:58 of a dud. Michaels and Roberts shook hands after the match. Johnny Ace had a tape sent in of his March 4, 1995 match at Budokan Hall where he and Steve Williams had one of the best matches of the year against Mitsuharu Misawa and Kenta Kobashi, and Titan turned him down in a proposed role as a Texas gunslinger type. Another thing lending credence to why Warrior would be brought back is internal fear that several of the top babyfaces, not just Diesel and Ramon, could be leaving. Jeff Jarrett suffered a serious back injury on February 17 in Memphis, taking a bump wrong against Ahmed Johnson. He was carried out of the ring and hospitalized. He's out of the hospital but no word on when he'll be back. On February 16 in Nashville, which also drew a big crowd, no official numbers at press time, Johnson won the match via DQ when Jarrett hit him with his unified title belt. Undertaker, Ramon and Helmsley all no-showed the Memphis card, so they put Yokozuna instead of Undertaker in the IC title match with Goldust with the walkout finish. They also had a triangular tag match where they allowed locals Tommy Rich and Doug Gilbert to go over both the Godwins and Body Donnas. It was kind of funny for Memphis fans to see Tex Slazenger on Wednesday and Phineas Godwin on Saturday in the same arena as two different people. Vader signed his 2-year contract within the past week or so. The deal allows him to still work Japan, however Titan must approve of any US indie dates, which would include the Los Angeles show. He's expected to start full-time on the road after WrestleMania. He injured himself at the In Your House doing a run-in as his shoulder hadn't recovered at all from surgery on February 6. The reason he wore the overcoat on In Your House and sweatshirt on Raw was to hide 2 large incisions and an arthroscopic hole which removed part of his AC joint and repaired a torn rotator cuff. He busted open the stitches doing the In Your House run-in, but still did a couple of run-ins at Raw. Bischoff did bring up Vader on Nitro, saying he ran away with his tail between his legs after Paul Orndorff got through with him while plugging the Baywatch episode filmed that summer with several WCW wrestlers including Vader. Bret Hart wrote an interesting column in the Calgary Sun newspaper regarding the Davey Boy Smith trial. Hart wrote, "I've kept my opinion to myself because I was not there and it would be unfair and foolish for me to speculate what happened on the night Davey and Cody Light had the altercation. I can say in all my years of knowing Davey I see him to be a modest and gregarious sort of guy, not a bully. Although he beat the charge, Davey has lost emotionally and financially. I hope he can put it all behind him and focus his attention back on his professional career. As for the unfortunate Mr. Light, who suffers permanently from this sad and unnecessary incident, I can only hope that things get better for him too. Being in the public eye has been a truly wonderful experience for most of my career, but is not all that it's chalked up to be, as Davey's court case exemplified. I've encountered the same thing over and over in my 18 years of professional wrestling, and that is the guy who has nothing to lose but everything to gain by taking on a professional wrestler in a public place. He usually has a blood alcohol level that is over the limit and an audience that includes a girl or a group of buddies. Ultimately, if he wins the fight, he has captured a moment of glory and can boast that he beat the Hitman. If he loses the fight, he just lost to a professional wrestler and gains the sympathy and respect of his audience. Any injuries incurred are a means to score some quick cash, maybe even a large settlement out of court. I have absolutely nothing to gain and everything to lose whenever this situation rears its ugly head. Whenever an obnoxious or belligerent patron of a bar or restaurant attempts to provoke me into an altercation, I alert the management and let them handle the situation. Hart also mentioned that he knows there are sports celebrities who are bullies that try to entice or intimidate people, but that his brother-in-law isn't a bully. The reader's pages. Gilbert Show. The incredible effort put forth by Dennis Coralluzzo to ensure a memorable, enjoyable and meaningful Eddie Gilbert Memorial Day in Cherry Hill, New Jersey on February 3rd was the single most unselfish act of promoting in my 23 years associated with the sport. To say everyone, the wrestlers, the fans and particularly the Gilbert family had an uplifting time at the banquet, convention and the matches is an understatement. At no time did Coralluzzo seek attention or even a pat on the back. He went to the extreme to deliver the right thing, honoring a great wrestling fan and wrestler. He had no angle or hidden motive. In a business where more times is more important than we, where loyalty is sold to the highest bidder and greed poisons many well-intended objectives, Coralluzzo proved there are people to be proud of in wrestling promoting. Along with Dory Funk, Jim Cornette, Jerry Lawler, Tommy Rich, Debbie Combs and many other well-spirited wrestlers and all the people locally who helped Coralluzzo out, something good happened and people really cared. Donnie Label. In New York. Wrestling War. I have a hard time dealing with these wrestling wars and the hypocrisy of Vince McMahon. When I lived in Norfolk and was in the Navy, I'd come home from a 6-month cruise to 50 tapes of different regional wrestling promotions. Every time McMahon put one of them out of business, a little more of me died. He was laughing all the way to the bank in those days. Now he wants us to feel sorry because billionaire Ted is his first viable threat. The skits are cute, but nothing I care to see every week. It comes off as jealousy. And as for the steroid crack, what about Ahmed Johnson? If McMahon wants to compete, put on better matches, more believable characters and better angles. Rick Davis. Bay City, Michigan. Loved your take on the Eric Bischoff lack of reaction on the January 15th Nitro. It's hard to believe that the guy who started all this name-calling suddenly shuts up the minute the WWF answers back in brilliant and funny fashion. Greg Ruffolo. Morris Plains, New Jersey. A view on the Monday Night Wars. Nitro was interesting at the outset because of the opportunity to see fresh faces presented in a new format. Many of us channel surfed between Nitro and Raw and stayed with Nitro at times last fall. The novelty factor has worn out its welcome on WCW. The only thing in life that are certain are death, taxes, and at between 9:50 and 10:05 p.m., one or more of the following will do a run-in and ruin the Nitro main event: Hogan, Luger, Savage, Sting, Giant, Flair, Sullivan. Well, you get the point. Your comments about the difficulties McMahon faces in using his wits to overcome WCW's financial advantages are well taken. But this is a business more closed to outsiders than many sports/entertainment franchises. Knowledge of the industry might count as heavily as money in this instance. Certainly that seems to be the direction McMahon is taking with Raw and the Royal Rumble. Only time will tell whether it pays off. Steve Johnson. Charlottesville, Virginia. Vince McMahon has got to be one of the biggest hypocrites in all of wrestling when it comes to his comments on steroid use in WCW. The WWF was built on juiced-up steroid monsters. Vince, clean up your own company before you open your mouth. Mike Braithwaite. North Palm Beach, Florida.